It was a Sunday like any other, or at least that's what I thought when I woke up. The sun was shining brightly, casting a warm golden hue across the quiet neighborhood. Birds chirped lazily in the trees, and a soft breeze rustled through the leaves. The fresh scent of spring filled the air, carrying with it the promise of calm and serenity. The street was quiet, except for the occasional hum of a passing car or the distant sound of children playing. It was the kind of day that made you feel like nothing could go wrong. Peaceful, ordinary, simple. Daniel, my son, was sitting on the sidewalk playing with his toy car, his wheelchair positioned next to him. Despite his disability, he was always determined to enjoy life to the fullest. His laughter was pure, a sound that seemed to brighten even the darkest of days. He wasn't fully mobile. His legs never developed the strength they needed, but his spirit had never been anything short of extraordinary. He had endured so much in his short life, yet every time I looked at him I saw a warrior. A small boy, yes, but one whose strength defied the limitations of his body. I was sitting nearby, just watching him play, enjoying the moment. Life had been difficult, sure, but moments like this, moments of peace and quiet, made it all feel worth it. I allowed myself to relax for a while, to forget about the challenges we faced as a family. Today there were no doctor's appointments, no hospital visits, no struggles. It was just me, Daniel, and the simplicity of a beautiful day. And then, it happened. I heard it first, a loud screeching noise, the unmistakable sound of tires rubber burning against the pavement. My heart skipped a beat, and I instinctively looked up, my eyes immediately locking on to the source of the noise. Before I could even react, before my brain had the chance to process the situation, the BMW came into view. It was coming straight toward us, moving at a terrifying speed, and there was no way to avoid it. The car slammed into Daniel's wheelchair with an earth-shaking thud. The impact sent a jolt of shock through my entire body, and for a moment, time seemed to slow down. My breath caught in my throat, and my heart stopped as I watched my son get knocked to the ground. His body, which had already fought so many battles in his young life, was once again at the mercy of a world that didn't care. I didn't know what to do first. My legs felt like they were made of lead as I tried to rush to him. The sound of the car's engine came to a screeching halt just inches away from Daniel's fallen form. In that moment, everything else faded. My mind was consumed by a single thought. Was Daniel okay? I reached him in a panic, kneeling beside him as my hands trembled. He was crying, his face scrunched up in pain and fear, his little hands gripped. The wheels of his chair as though trying to hold on to something that might save him from the world that had just betrayed him. I could see the anguish in his eyes, the confusion, the pain, the terror. But most of all, I saw his bravery. Even in that moment of agony, Daniel was still trying to be strong. I turned my gaze toward the car, and that's when I saw her. The woman who had done this. She was sitting behind the wheel, looking far more concerned about the condition of her BMW than the well-being of my son. She had a look of entitlement on her face, her sunglasses perched on her nose as though she had every right to drive through our neighborhood like it was her private race course. She wasn't even bothered by what had just happened. Without a single ounce of compassion, she got out of the car. "Get out of my way," she snapped, as if my son was the inconvenience, not the other way around. Her voice was cold, dismissive, and dripping with arrogance. She wasn't concerned about the fact that she had just hit a child, nor did she seem to care that he was lying on the pavement, visibly injured. All she cared about was her car. I stood up slowly, my heart still pounding in my chest. But now, a new emotion was starting to rise within me, anger. A fire that had been smoldering inside me for years suddenly ignited. This woman, this Karen, had just run over my son. She hadn't even spared him a second thought. I could see it in her eyes. She didn't care. To her, Daniel was just an obstacle in the way of her perfect, pristine life. Something inside me snapped. My blood was boiling, but I remained calm. I had to be calm. For Daniel. I walked over to him, trying to mask the rage that was building up inside me. I placed my hands gently on his shoulders, trying to reassure him, even though I was struggling to contain my own emotions. "Daniel, it's okay," I whispered, my voice shaking slightly. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about my son anymore. It was about justice, about standing up to someone who thought they could get away with hurting him. I looked up at the woman who was now inspecting the side of her car as if checking for scratches. Her focus was entirely on the damage to her vehicle. The anger within me began to boil over, but I didn't shout, didn't lose control. Instead, I spoke with the quiet authority I had learned over the years in the most intense situations. "You're going to pay for this," I said, my voice firm and steady. I could feel her dismissive gaze, but she had no idea who she was dealing with. The woman seemed to blink in surprise at my words, but she didn't respond. She didn't know me, didn't know what I was capable of. She had no idea that I wasn't just some average father who would let this go. She had no idea that I was trained to handle high-pressure situations, to stand up against injustice, and she would soon learn just how wrong she was to treat my son with such disregard. I wasn't going to let her get away with this, not today, not ever. In that moment, I made a promise to myself and to Daniel. We were going to get justice. And no matter how rich or powerful this woman thought she was, nothing could protect her from the consequences of her actions. Most people who meet me for the first time see a man who's always in control. They see someone who's composed, who handles high-pressure situations with an ease that seems almost unnatural. I've earned this reputation, and for good reason. In my line of work, control is everything. The ability to remain calm in the face of chaos, whether it's a hostage situation, an armed standoff, or a dangerous criminal on the run, is what defines the best in my field. But what they don't know about me, what they don't see, is the experience behind that calm exterior. They don't see the countless hours spent under intense pressure, making split-second decisions that could mean life or death. They don't see the years spent in law enforcement, learning how to manage chaos, control situations, and keep people safe, even when the world is crumbling around them. I'm not just another guy in the neighborhood. I'm not just the dad who mows the lawn and waves at people as they drive by. No, I'm a high-ranking SWAT officer, someone trained to navigate the most intense, life-threatening situations imaginable. I've faced armed criminals, dangerous standoffs, and active shooter scenarios, each one a test of my skill, my nerves, and my ability to make decisions under pressure. I've seen the worst humanity has to offer and somehow survived it. I've been in the thick of it, handling situations that could turn deadly in an instant. But nothing in my career, nothing in my training, could have prepared me for what happened that day. As I knelt beside my son, the blood rushing to my ears as my mind raced through countless thoughts, I realized just how far I was willing to go to protect him. Daniel wasn't just another kid in my neighborhood. He wasn't just my son. He was everything to me. His disability had already made his life difficult enough, and now this woman, this entitled, reckless woman, had dared to hurt him. I felt the wave of fear and anger flood through me, but I fought it back. I had to remain in control. I had to be the calm in the storm. If I lost my cool, if I let my emotions get the best of me, I wouldn't be able to do what needed to be done. Looked at my son, who was shaking in his wheelchair, tears streaming down his face. His hand was clutching the armrest, and I could see the fear in his eyes. My heart broke for him, but it also hardened with determination. He was my responsibility, and I would do anything to keep him safe. The world may have been cruel to him, but it would never break him, not if I had anything to say about it. As I turned to face the woman who had caused all of this, my body tensed. She was standing near her car, inspecting it as though it were more important than the child she had just run over. She hadn't even checked on Daniel. She hadn't apologized. She hadn't shown a single ounce of remorse. Instead, she was more concerned about the possibility of a scratch on her precious BMW. Her entitlement was palpable. She wasn't scared. She wasn't ashamed. She was irritated that her perfect day had been interrupted. I knew what I had to do. The police arrived, quickly, responding to the scene within minutes, but I had already taken control of the situation. I wasn't just some random dad on the sidewalk. I wasn't some guy who'd lose his head in the face of adversity. I was a high-ranking SWAT officer, someone who had been trained to handle tense situations with precision and calm. The moment I told the officers who I was, I could see the shift in their demeanor. They didn't look at me like just another witness to the scene. They respected my authority, my training, and my ability to navigate the chaos. I wasn't just a father, trying to protect his son. I was a professional who knew how to handle situations like this. I approached the officers, giving them a brief rundown of what had happened. I didn't waste time with pleasantries or emotional outbursts. I wasn't here to rant and rave. I was here to get justice for my son, and I would do whatever it took to make that happen. I told them about the damage to Daniel's wheelchair, the evidence that the woman had hit him with her car, and how she had shown no remorse. I made sure to document everything, ensuring that no detail would be left unaccounted for. I knew how these things went. People like her, people with money, people with power, often thought they could get away with anything. They thought the law didn't apply to them. But not today. Not when my son was involved. As I spoke, I could feel the woman's eyes on me. She was watching, studying me, no doubt trying to figure out what kind of person I was. But she didn't know who I was. She didn't know what I had done, what I was capable of. She didn't understand the strength that came from years of training, from the countless hours spent learning how to handle the most difficult, dangerous situations imaginable. She didn't know that I had faced down death more times than I cared to count. She didn't know that I had been the one to save lives, to protect people when others had cowered in fear. I wasn't just angry. I wasn't just a father fighting for his son's justice. I was a man with a deep understanding of the law and how to make it work in my favor. I had dealt with criminals before, dangerous, deadly people who wanted nothing more than to destroy the lives of others. But this woman? She was no different. Her arrogance, her sense of entitlement made her dangerous in her own way. And I would make sure she paid for what she had done. I could see her growing more agitated, but I didn't care. I knew how to handle people like her. I had dealt with plenty of criminals, and they were all the same. They all thought they could manipulate the system, lie their way out of trouble, and get away with anything. But I wasn't going to let her get away with this. Not today. Not when it came to my son. As the officers continued their investigation, I made sure to keep my emotions in check. I couldn't let her get to me. I couldn't let her see me lose control. I had to stay calm, to be the professional that I was trained to be. I would let the law handle the rest. I would let the evidence speak for itself. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about the law. It wasn't just about proving she was wrong and getting justice. This was personal. She had hurt my son, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Not now, not ever. The officers took the woman aside, continuing their questioning. I stayed by my son, making sure he was okay, assuring him that everything would be fine. I knew he was scared, but I also knew he could see the strength in me, the unwavering determination to make things right. And in that moment, as I looked into his eyes, I realized something. I would never let anyone hurt him again. No one. Not while I was still standing. The moment the police arrived, I could feel the tension in the air shift. It wasn't just about the accident anymore. This had become something more. I had dealt with criminals before, dangerous, unpredictable individuals who could lie without blinking, manipulate situations, and use every trick in the book to get out of trouble. But this woman, Karen, she was different. She didn't understand the depths to which I had been trained. She didn't know who she was dealing with or the lengths I was willing to go to ensure justice was served. She thought her privilege, her entitled attitude, could shield her from the consequences of her actions. She couldn't have been more wrong. As the officers began to take statements, I didn't just sit back and wait for things to unfold. I didn't allow myself the luxury of simply being a bystander. I knew what was at stake, and I wasn't going to leave it in the hands of someone who might not fully understand the gravity of the situation. I was meticulous in my approach, gathering as much evidence as I could. I immediately checked the dashcam footage from my car, which had been parked just a few yards away. My mind raced through the details, replaying everything in my head. The way the car had swerved, the sound of the impact, the horror in Daniel's eyes. I had no intention of letting Karen walk away unscathed. This wasn't just about a physical injury. It was about something deeper. It was about a lesson that needed to be learned, not just for her, but for everyone who thought they could get away with hurting others. Karen's story was a work of fiction from the very beginning. The moment she opened her mouth, I could sense the falsehood seeping from her words. She insisted that the entire incident had been an accident, that she hadn't hit Daniel, that there was no way her car could have possibly collided with him. Her tone was dismissive, cold, and self-righteous, as though she was more concerned about saving face than owning up to what she had done. But I wasn't buying it, not for a second. My training as a SWAT officer had taught me to spot danger before it ever made itself known. It had taught me to read people, to notice the subtle cues in their behavior, and to identify when they were lying. I had spent years learning how to de-escalate tense situations, how to observe the smallest details that others might miss. And Karen's body language? It was a textbook example of someone trying to manipulate the situation to their advantage. She was acting the part of the victim, her arms crossed, her face contorted in feigned concern, but it was all a facade. Her eyes darted nervously as she spoke, and every time the officers asked her a direct question, her answers became more evasive. Her shoulders tensed, and her voice became higher-pitched whenever the conversation veered into territory she couldn't control. There was no remorse in her eyes, no hint of guilt for what she had done. Instead, there was only defensiveness, an urgent need to protect herself at all costs. I watched closely, my gaze fixed on her every move. I had seen it all before. Criminals who thought they could lie their way out of anything. People who thought they could manipulate their way to safety. But Karen wasn't dealing with a naive bystander. She was dealing with someone who had spent years in the trenches, someone who could spot a lie from a mile away. As she spoke, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of satisfaction welling up inside me. I knew she was lying. I knew the truth was on my side. The evidence was undeniable, and I didn't need her to admit guilt for justice to be served. I had already gathered enough proof to make sure she would face the consequences of her actions. The officers, though polite, were clearly starting to see through her act. I could sense the shift in their demeanor as they exchanged glances, their eyes narrowing just slightly, their questions becoming more pointed. They were picking up on the inconsistencies in her story, and it didn't take long for them to realize she was trying to cover her tracks. Karen wasn't the only one who was playing a game. I had my own strategy. I knew how to play this game, better than she did. My job had taught me how to handle the truth, how to manage a situation in such a way that it couldn't be twisted or misrepresented. I had been in high-stress situations, had seen people try to manipulate facts to fit their narrative, and I knew the importance of sticking to the truth. I had already documented the damage to Daniel's wheelchair, which had been knocked sideways in the collision. The injuries to my son were evident, but I had also taken photos of the scene, of the skid marks left by the BMW, of the position of Daniel's wheelchair, and of the dents in the car. The dashcam footage was invaluable, showing exactly what had happened in real time from the angle of my parked car. It didn't lie. It didn't twist the facts. It was clear, unambiguous evidence of what had occurred. The officers were now fully aware of Karen's deception, and as they continued to question her, I could see the cracks beginning to form in her story. Her answers became more convoluted, her tone more defensive, and I could see the frustration mounting within her. She had been caught in her lie, and there was no way out. But instead of owning up to her mistake, she doubled down on her story, convinced that she could still talk her way out of it. It was almost pitiful to watch. As I listened to the exchange, I allowed myself a brief moment of satisfaction. This was justice. The truth was on my side, and nothing Karen did or said could change that. She had hurt my son, and no amount of lies, no amount of bluster would let her escape the consequences of her actions. Eventually, the officers had had enough. They moved, her aside, taking her statement separately from the rest of us. I watched as they began to finalize the details, taking note of her behavior and her statements. As the situation unfolded, I could see that they weren't just taking the matter seriously. They were beginning to understand the weight of what had happened. Karen's privilege wasn't going to protect her this time. She wasn't above the law. And I wasn't going to let her get away with it. For me, this wasn't about getting revenge. It wasn't about seeking out punishment just for the sake of it. It was about ensuring that justice was served, that the truth came out, and that my son received the justice he deserved. The evidence was irrefutable. The law would take care of the rest. But I knew one thing for sure. Karen's days of lying her way out of situations were over. This time, the truth would prevail. And I would be there to make sure it did. The days that followed were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and appointments. Insurance companies flooded my inbox with forms to fill out, medical bills piled up, and every day seemed to present another task in the never-ending process of recovery. But amidst all of this, there was something that kept me grounded, something that gave me the strength to keep going. I wasn't worried. I wasn't afraid of what was to come. I knew the system would work in our favor. Karen's actions, her reckless disregard for my son's safety, had been captured in countless ways. The evidence was irrefutable. The inspection of Karen's BMW was thorough. The damages to her car were minimal, scratches that any person with a sense of responsibility would shrug off. But the damage to Daniel's wheelchair was significant. It was clear from the bent metal, the cracked wheels, and the deep indentations on the seat that the force of the impact had been severe. And that was just the physical evidence. There were the photos, the dashcam footage, the witness statements, all pointing to the same conclusion. Karen had hit my son. Even more damning was the fact that she hadn't even stopped to check on him. Instead, she had been more concerned about the possibility of a scratch on her precious vehicle. That was the part that enraged me the most. It wasn't just an accident. It was the way she acted afterward. The way she dismissed my son's pain as though it were an inconvenience in her perfect little world. What truly surprised me, however, was the reaction from the community. Before the incident, I was just another guy who kept to himself, the quiet neighbor who never made waves. People knew me as the father who helped his son, who took care of his family. But after that day, everything changed. Word spread quickly, and soon people who had never really spoken to me began offering support. They offered their help, their well wishes, and most of all, they offered their trust. They saw me not just as a father, but as a protector. They saw that I wasn't going to stand idly by and let someone hurt my son without facing consequences. The local news picked up the story, and before long, I found myself becoming a symbol in the community. Not because I wanted to be, but because people saw what had happened and they rallied behind me. They saw what Karen had done, and they were disgusted by it. I wasn't alone in this fight, and that realization gave me more strength than I had ever expected. It was a feeling of solidarity, of knowing that the community wasn't going to let Karen's arrogance go unchallenged. She wasn't just hurting my family. She was violating the trust of an entire neighborhood. As the court date drew near, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of anticipation. Karen, on the other hand, seemed to be preparing for the fight of her life. She had no idea what she was up against. She thought her wealth and her status could shield her from the consequences of her actions. But she had no idea who she was dealing with. She had no idea that the person she had hurt wasn't just a random father, but a man with years of training in high-pressure situations. I had faced down criminals, threats, and dangerous standoffs before. But this was personal. This was my son. On the day of the trial, I stood in front of the judge with a calm, military-grade focus. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I was ready. I had prepared for this moment for weeks, knowing that it wasn't just about the law. It was about doing what was right. As I took the stand, I presented the evidence methodically, speaking clearly and calmly. I didn't let my emotions cloud my words. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I simply laid out the facts. The dashcam footage was played for the court, and I could see Karen's face as she watched the video. There was no way to deny what had happened. There was no way to spin the situation in her favor. The footage spoke for itself. I watched her squirm in her seat, her face flushing with a mix of embarrassment and anger. She had no defense. She had no excuse. When it was Karen's turn to speak, she tried to maintain her composure, but I could see the cracks in her facade. She was nervous, trying to paint herself as the victim in the situation, claiming that it was all an unfortunate mistake, that she hadn't meant to hurt my son. But her words rang hollow. The evidence was clear, and the witnesses, including the officers who had spoken with her on the day of the incident, testified to her lack of concern for Daniel's well-being. Her story had fallen apart. The judge listened intently, and I could tell that he wasn't swayed by Karen's pleading. He had seen this kind of behavior before. He had dealt with people who thought they could buy their way out of consequences, people who thought their status could protect them from the law. But not today. Not in this courtroom. Not when the evidence was so clear, so overwhelming. In the end, the judge ruled in our favor. Karen was ordered to pay for the medical bills, the damages to Daniel's wheelchair, and the emotional distress she had caused my son. It wasn't about the money. It was about holding her accountable for her actions. It was about showing her, and anyone else who thought they could get away with hurting others, that the law wasn't something you could manipulate to fit your desires. The law was there to protect people, and no one was above it. As I left the courtroom, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The battle had been long, but it was worth it. Daniel's wheelchair would be fixed, his medical bills covered, and most importantly, the injustice had been corrected. But more than that, it was the feeling of justice being served that gave me the greatest satisfaction. Karen had thought she could get away with it. But she had learned the hard way that no one gets to hurt my son and get away with it. It was a victory not just for me, but for anyone who had ever been wronged by someone who thought they could escape the consequences of their actions. It was a reminder that even in a world that sometimes seems stacked against us, justice can prevail. The courtroom drama was over, but the real victory had just begun. As I walked out of the courthouse, the weight that had been pressing down on me for so long started to lift. The tension, the anger, the sense of helplessness that had consumed me since that moment when Karen hit my son. It all seemed to dissolve into the air. We had won. It wasn't just a legal victory. It was something deeper, more profound. We had taken a stand for what was right, and justice had been served. But the victory wasn't just mine. It belonged to Daniel, to my family, and to everyone who had ever felt small or powerless in the face of injustice. I turned to Daniel, who had been quiet throughout the entire ordeal, his eyes wide as he processed everything that had happened. Despite the fact that his disability still caused him physical pain and limitations, I saw something in his gaze that hadn't been there before. It wasn't just the relief of knowing that the legal battle was over. It was hope. It was a flicker of belief that maybe, just maybe, life didn't have to be unfair. That sometimes the good guys really do win. We weren't just a family anymore. We were a team. We had fought together, faced an injustice together, and we had come out stronger on the other side. Daniel, though still struggling with the challenges of his disability, was different now. His shoulders were straighter, his smile a little wider. I could see the pride in his eyes, the confidence that came from knowing that he wasn't alone in this world. That no matter how tough life got, he had someone in his corner who would fight for him with everything I had. The support we received from the community was overwhelming. Neighbors, friends, even strangers who had heard about the case reached out to offer their support. It wasn't just the legal victory that mattered to them. It was the message we had sent. The message that no one, no matter how privileged or entitled, was above the law. That we would stand up for what was right no matter the cost. I wasn't just protecting my son. I was standing up for everyone who had ever felt overlooked or ignored, for everyone who had ever felt like they didn't have a voice. This sense of solidarity, of community, was something I hadn't anticipated. People came together, not just to support us, but to support each other. There was a collective recognition that when one person is wronged, we all suffer. And when one person stands up for what's right, it lifts everyone. I had always known that life wasn't fair, that bad things happen to good people, but this experience taught me something else, that even in the face of unfairness, we could create something good. We could make a difference. As I watched Daniel play with his toy car in the front yard, the sun shining down on him, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. He was still dealing with his disability, still facing daily struggles that I could never fully understand, but now there was something else in his eyes. It wasn't just pain or frustration anymore. It was strength. It was a quiet determination, a belief that he could overcome whatever challenges life threw his way. And that, more than anything, was the greatest gift I could give him. The knowledge that he wasn't powerless, that his voice mattered, and that he could stand up for himself, no matter what. This ordeal had reaffirmed something that I had always known deep down. The greatest battles aren't always the ones fought with weapons or in courtrooms. Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones we fight with love, with strength, and with the courage to stand up for what's right, even when the odds are stacked against us. It wasn't about winning the case. It was about showing my son that no matter what life threw at him, no matter how difficult the road ahead might seem, he would always have someone who would fight beside him, and not just anyone, a warrior, someone who would never give up, never let go. The fight we had faced together wasn't over. It wasn't just a battle against Karen. It was a battle against everything that tried to hold us back. It was a battle against the injustice of the world, against people who thought they could hurt others without facing the consequences. And even though the case was closed, even though the verdict had been rendered, I knew that our fight was far from over. This was just the beginning. Daniel had already shown me what strength looked like. He had fought his own battles every day of his life, and he had done it with grace and resilience. I had spent so much time trying to protect him, but in that moment I realized that he was the one teaching me. He was the one showing me what it truly meant to be strong. As we stood together, the sun setting behind us, I realized that we were no longer just a family in the face of adversity. We were a family of warriors, bonded by love and united by the shared belief that we would never let anyone take away our right to stand up for ourselves. We had fought this battle, and we had won. And as long as we were together, we would continue to fight, continue to stand up for what was right, no matter what came our way. It wasn't just the victory that mattered. It was the journey, the strength we had gained along the way, and the lessons we had learned. We weren't just survivors, we were victors. And that was a new beginning. If you've ever felt like giving up or thought that justice wasn't within reach, remember this story. It's a reminder that no matter how powerful or entitled someone may seem, standing up for what's right can make a difference. If you believe in fighting for justice, in protecting those you love, and in holding others accountable for their actions, join us. Share this story, speak out, and be the voice for those who need it. Together we can create a world where fairness and truth always prevail. For more stories of courage, resilience, and standing up for what's right, don't forget to follow us at the HOA Stories, because everyone deserves to have their voice heard. Stand with us. Stand for justice.